you sit there for the rest of that discussion?
I did.
And how did they finish it up?
It talks about Gang A. Were you there for that?
Right. I caught the tail end at the beginning of that.
Basically, what we should do to renovate the system, and how it was more about lifting the veil of secrecy on that legislation.
It's kind of a singular view. I thought they were just talking about oversight, when in reality, you understand that the 9/11 Commission basically recommended some fairly far-reaching things like the establishment of a national intelligence director and stuff like that. I wasn't sure whether you guys were familiar. Did he talk about that?
Oh yeah, he did talk about that. I don't know.
Are you sitting here, Carl? Anybody sitting here?
He said running out planes. Not necessarily.
Trying to get us to sit in the seats like in the center down there. I'm like, I'm here for.
Oh, I thought we had that seat too.
Well, please, I don't be here for 2 hours.
Hey, Scott, I think she
Oh
was
wait,
gonna...
I thought we
you
were
were sitting
saying
there?
that. I thought we had 2 seats.
Are you going to ask a question?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. Is that all right? Or I mean, there's more.
Talk to him.
No, I don't care. Believe me.
Oh, I'll go sit over there. All right.
No, that's okay.
No, I don't.
But I could also sit down there. There are like seats down there that I might go take.
Actually, I don't care nearly as much. I'm here for moral support. Is what I'm here for.
Yeah, me too.
So, that's why I'm here. Support my buddy.
Cool.
So, did you go? Good. How are you? It's so nice not to have anything to do.
Pardon?
It's so nice not to have anything to do. Oh my God. Just sit and enjoy yourself.
I'm exhausted. I just have 3 days to do, but very good.
Good. Clinton. Yes, we all did.
Oh, you were there.
I came in the back because I didn't know she was here because I really hadn't paid attention to all that stuff. But I went up there yesterday, just randomly, and I heard one of the lead guys talking about the senator, when the senator was here, and I was like, that must be Dean. And then I went in yesterday to class, and Rosie said, ooh, did you see Hillary? And I was like, oops, no, and I grabbed up my stuff, and I didn't ask a question at all, and I went straight up there. So,
That's awesome. Hi.
I know.
Can you believe it?
I know. Okay, you
This
get
is awesome.
Okay,
We'll switch.
No, I don't need to see anything.
Oh, so is that a good one? Thank you. We're good.
Sorry.
We'll get joined by people who want to use the mic anyway. So.
Well, I'm supposed to be meeting someone here.
This is
I'm going to
tremendous.
just run down quick and try and find her. And if I can't, I'll go back.
Good.
Thanks. Well, I went out based on your blog,
Okay.
and I went to CVS, and I bought like 3 different glasses for a total of $9.
No. Brilliant.
It was very nice.
Yeah, I think so too.
Oh, was it okay with what I sent you?
Oh, I'm thrilled. I was nervous like before when you're like,
Oh, I'm so glad. Okay.
I know. Okay. It improved a lot.
oh, I'm sure.
It was
And
like
I know. All the way to the top now.
I mean, which I couldn't believe that's what it was when the 9/11 commission guy was here.
Not. Oh, it filled up or is
No,
half?
it was like
Actually, there weren't that many people here that time.
Yeah,
I could not believe that.
Surprising.
I think
There was
people
a
were
lot of
in
stuff
into it.
going on that night.
It's good.
I don't remember what else was going on.
Oh, it was a big day here. Did y'all see Dean? Did anybody see Dean?
No.
Yeah, I was in class. I was taking a test.
Oh,
Might
how did it
go.
go?
Fine.
What was it? The budget? No,
No,
elections.
campaign.
That's right.
Easy. Oh, good. I teased him yesterday, Steve Jordan.
Yeah.
Did you see him yesterday? He didn't do his tie properly. Did you see him in class? See him in the evening? He tied his tie outside of his shirt collar. He goes, I didn't look in the mirror. I said, well, you'd help me if I had lettuce in my teeth or something. He goes, yeah. So I said, then
He's such a funny guy.
I said, no wonder people are laughing at me.
I love him.
I don't think literally, but maybe they were.
It doesn't, even if they were, he'd make a joke out of it.
That's good.
He's one of these very funny guys, very funny, very self-effacing, always making a joke.
I took it well.
Always making fat jokes about himself.
Oh no.
No, you don't feel sorry for him. It's just funny. He's
It's
like
not low
Okay.
self-esteem.
not-
It's like,
God no. No,
other
he's like totally mocks the class too. Like he'll make fun of people. He's really funny.
you organized queen.
Oh no, it just popped open, so I'm just trying to shove back in there and forget about it. So
Nice. I could use doing that.
I gotta say though that if you ever
Welcome to the forum. I'm Swanee Hunt. I direct the Women in Public Policy program. We are delighted to have you here. This is the 6th year that we have had a forum event to bring to you women peace-building experts from conflicts all around the world. We've had women from over 30 conflicts, over 300 women, in fact, whom we have connected with more than 3,000 policymakers in capitals all over the world. Our topic today is the role of women in addressing violent conflict. Many of you know that the UN Security Council passed a resolution 1325, which demands the full inclusion of women in informal and formal peace processes. And that was followed then by a G8 resolution that was spearheaded by the US government and the Canadians, which came at about the same time as a resolution from the European Union. The Organization of American States followed suit last year. We have lots and lots of wonderful words, but the walk is having trouble keeping up with the talk. And so it's important that we have occasions like this to talk about what the role of women is. What's the experience of women in conflict situations? What are the obstacles that they face from policymakers or from theorists? As you know, change happens when the pressure comes from different directions. It comes from inside the system, outside the system, top down, bottom up. And our range of speakers here this evening represent those different directions. We have Justice Shirani Tilakavardhana, who is on the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka. I am so relieved now that I've said her name. I worked so hard on that name. And from now on, it's Shirani, okay? Okay. She has been an extraordinary advocate working on issues around child abuse, child witness. She's been a consultant to the International Criminal Court. She's worked internationally in Pakistan and India. She's lectured all over the world. And she is an ardent proponent of globalized justice, looking at how these principles spread across the world. We also have Dr. Atema Eklai. Atema was one of the original designers of Women Waging Peace, which was incubated here at the Kennedy School. Dr. Eklai has her doctorate from the Harvard Ed School, but she has worked in conflicts all over Africa. She's done trainings in refugee camps. She has worked with the Ministry of Education in Kenya and has tremendous sensitivity for the experience of very grassroots women, helping them move from what others would see as victim status into actors status. Then, my dear friend, Masuda Sultan, and I'm sure several of you know her. She is a student here at the Kennedy School, but she got turned on to coming here because she was here last year as one of the women who had come for this program. Masuda left Afghanistan when she was 5 years old and grew up in New York. And when Afghanistan became the center of the world a few years ago, she decided that she would give herself, her life, to addressing the needs of that country and her many relatives there. She held a meeting in Kandahar last year where a group of women from across the country came up with a Women's Bill of Rights. She then met with President Karzai, got his commitment to appointing 50% of the women that he had the appointment power over for the Laurier-Jagat making those women 50% of his appointments. She has been very involved in concrete policies and practice, such as the earmarking of $60 million in aid to Afghan women in a recent collaboration with Congresswoman Maloney. She also has been working on the issue of the civilians who've been killed by U.S. bombing, and has done that working with the group of the September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows. Masuda is, as you can see, not only photogenic, but she's working on documentaries. She's featured in documentaries on Afghanistan, but she also is very thoughtful and is working on a book which will come out in January '06, My War at Home. Now, my friend, the other bookend this evening is Steve Walt. He is the academic dean here at the Kennedy School and a noted figure in the field of international relations. And so I will ask the three women experts here to talk about their experiences, what they as women have done or what they have seen other women doing. And Steve, we're going to do this as a conversation, so you can be the third, fifth, and seventh speaker if you'd like. You can just work your way in as much as you'd like. We're going to open it up after about half an hour or so for questions. There are 4 microphones, as you know. And who would like to begin?
May I begin?
You may.
Good evening, everybody. Isn't it strange that we need justice in peace and we need justice in war? Ironically, it is when the legitimate expectation of all people, including minorities and women and disadvantages, their legitimate needs are not met, that they look for alternate dispute resolutions. But it is critical, especially in times of war, for us to have true justice. Justice which accommodates equality for all. And it is good for us to remember that justice is about people, war is about people, and peace is about people. It is, and people are diverse, they are plural. And somehow the very plurality and diversity which we should be enjoying is often the root cause which divides and separates us. If I were to ask you, would you prefer a world of butterflies, of black and white butterflies? Or do you want a world where there are beautiful colored butterflies with all the different colors? You would automatically choose the multicolored butterflies. And yet, it is that same plurality that divides us. So therefore, it's intrinsic in the delivery of justice for us to accommodate that difference and create an overarching equality of all people. Now, global justice, you would have heard of globalization of law and globalization of trade. Today, because of the need of global peace, we have the creation of what is called a globalization of the law. And the globalization of the law creates the language of peace. What is this language of peace? It is the Charter of Human Rights that guarantees to all freedoms of speech and equality. And it's amazing how it plays out in each of our countries and how it becomes a very important tool in our countries. For instance, if a woman in my country, which is full of stereotypes and myths and repressions, were to go walking on the road in the night in a pair, for instance, if I went jogging in the night in a pair of shorts at about 9 o'clock in the night and I was raped, I'm sure 90% of the judges would say, well, she asked for it. She wore the wrong clothes and she was out at the wrong time. But look, if I use that globalized language, and if I say the freedoms and guarantees that I enshrine, the freedom of expression, which is after all what I wear, It is my expression. My freedom of movement that is guaranteed under the Charter of Human Rights. If I was to use that and say, well, equality means the same rights for men and women, and if my colleague can go jogging in the middle of the night in his shorts and nobody jumps on, the women don't jump on him and rape him because he has seductive legs, then why can't I, who is ensured and guaranteed equality in my own country, under my own constitution, have the same rights of equality? So equality is very much part of global justice. But the Charter gives us the language of equality and peace. But global justice involves one important aspect. It means the stronger has to be the first to take the first step. It means the stronger and the majority has to take the initiatives. And let me give you an example of this. When peace talks first began in Sri Lanka, we had a group of women through the churches going to meet mothers across the border. And in our country, as you know, probably know, in Sri Lanka, we have the majority Sinhalese and the minority Tamils. And the church was used as a medium to get them just to meet each other, to begin some kind of a dialogue. And these mothers who had all lost their children were seated in this church. I can just only imagine what they went through. And suddenly this mother, who was a member of the Sinhala majority, after 10 years of war, mind you, this happened for the first time, stood up in that church. And she went to the front of the church and she said, on behalf of my Sinhalese people, I want to ask for your forgiveness. And immediately a very old staid lady from the other side of the room, who was a member of the Tamil group, got up and said, on behalf of the Tamils, I want to ask your forgiveness. And in a minute, they were hugging and kissing each other and crying over each other. Now why? Because of that, the majority person just gave up a little bit of their rights and privilege. And that is what equality is all about. And it's no point us talking of the theory of equality if equality also means that you and I, in our everyday life, lives and speaks the language of equality. It means that you and I identify prejudices. We identify myths and stereotypes. We identify our own biases. I believe that if we talk this language of equality, we will have global justice. If we live it, we breathe it. Because when the history of this time is going to be written, it will not be written about the wickedness of a minority of people. It will be written about the silence and thereby the condemnation of the majority of people like you and I. So global justice is about breaking the silence. It is about having equality in every sphere of our life. It is about making it the reality of minorities, the realities of women and children. It is about embracing justice with equality. And I believe if that is the norm of our life, that peace, which we so ardently seek, will come very gently and settle on each of our shoulders. I think that's what I want to say right now.
A powerful statement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who would like to pick up?
Hard act to follow, but as a student here at the Kennedy School, I know that I've spoken with a lot of fellow students about what can we do. We're sort of in this very protected environment. There are things going on that seem, so far away, thousands of miles away. We feel like we have no control. And one of the things that reminds me about the power of being in this country and at a university as prestigious as this is when the Taliban were in power and the United States was moving towards recognizing them, it was the feminist movement in the United States and Europe that worked very hard to make sure that the US government did not recognize did not have diplomatic relations with the Taliban and did not recognize them as an official legitimate government. And I think that those women knew, as we have learned, that wherever there's oppression, of women. There are other problems. There's tyranny, and now we know there's terrorism. And that terrorism has come to our front doorstep. And so one of the lessons I've learned is the ways in which women and security are linked. I'll share a story with you. The Afghan ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Jawad, was telling me recently that it's in the interest of the Afghan government to have women involved in the peace process, because by involving women, he said, they are undermining the extremists and the spoilers. Women are a moderating force for fundamentalism, Islamic extremism, all kinds of extremism. And that's the lesson that I think we're starting to learn on a worldwide level. One of the things women in Afghanistan have done is been huge proponents of disarmament of the militias. They've written petitions, they've had protests. They're one of the loudest voices for disarming ordinary people. And there's an estimated almost 100,000 militiamen who are armed. The Afghan army right now is at 15,000. And so women have recognized that security is really mostly in their interest. They're not the ones with the arms. I want to tell you a story about how women differ from men, a very, very specific example, but one that has touched me. I went back to Afghanistan in December of 2001. I had been there during Taliban times in July of 2001. After 9/11 happened, I hadn't been back. I went there with a film crew. We were doing a documentary to sort of see what had changed when the Taliban had fallen. I got to Pakistan and I found my relatives, and they had come out of the country. And I learned when I went to visit them, with the cameras rolling, they told me the story of how they had fled Kandahar city, were living in a village, and one night they were being attacked, bombs were falling on them. They told the story of running out of their homes, being shot at. Children fell, women, men, all running in the middle of the night in the dark. And when the men told me this story, it was a U.S. attack on their village. And they weren't sure what had happened, why they had been targeted. They needed answers, they needed an apology, they needed help. When I talked to the men, I went into the room and there were about 5 different men and tons of children standing around. The men told me this story, and the father said, I carried my daughter, she was shot, and then I realized she was dead, I had to put her down, but I really want to know who did this to us? Who targeted our village? Can you please just help us find out who did this so we can go get them? We want revenge. I moved on to the room where the women were, and there were about 15 women. I mean, just the whole room was packed, and the children followed. And the women told me their story, and much like the men, they had just experienced unspeakable things. And they said, we want to know what you could do for us. We want an apology, and we want assistance. We want those homes to be rebuilt, and we want our medical costs to be paid. And it was just that stark, the difference between revenge and moving on and getting assistance. And if we could have that multiplied many times, what would Afghanistan look like? What would the world look like? It's just one story, but it taught me a lesson about the differences between the way men and women address conflict and the power of reconciliation.
Wow. Steve or Atema, either of you?
When one woman suffers, we all suffer. And when one of us enjoy, we all enjoy. So what can we do? The answer is we are always doing. But nobody recognizes it sometimes. But that doesn't mean that we don't do. We are always in this business of peace. We are also in the business of war. We are part of the communities that create this war. We are part of the families that produce the warriors. And then we are part of those affected by war when our spouses, our children, we ourselves, when we go to war, die, we remain. We are the largest majority in refugee camps with our children. So this issue of peace is our business. So we are in the business just for being women and being in communities and nations. Internationally, we link with each other. On continents, we link with each other. I want to tell you what happened to me just sometime this past year in November. I was here, and Wangari Maathai sent me an email and told me that she wanted me to come home immediately and lead a delegation to the Sudan. When Wangari asks, you respond. So I hopped on the plane and off I went, off to Kenya. And I had to be at a meeting that very day. Forget about jet lag. So there I was, sitting at a meeting an hour after I left the airport. And what were we doing at this meeting? We were strategizing on how to go to talk to Bashir, who is the president of Sudan, but also how to talk to the head of the African Union. And what came up was we got signatures. Many of the African women haven't gone to school, so what we were getting mostly was prints of their fingers. And my job and the delegation of the 20 women I was to go to the Sudan with was to carry this, not even just to post them, but to make sure they arrived. So we did not go to send this to Bashir, but we sent it to Bashir's wife. And we also sent the same signatures to the wife of the head of the African Union. And we carried them by hand so that these reach these hands of these women. Women have power. And we told them, we gave them our word. We said, we don't know what time, and we don't know when, we don't know what day of the week, but we want you to tell your husbands that we are tired of what is happening in Darfur. From that time, that is when the African Union started reacting. So we knew that we had participated in that. And Bashir started allowing the international community to come to the Sudan. And we knew we were there. So we are always right there pushing, be it at night, be it during the day, but we knew that we had participated in this. So this issue of peace for me is key because it is, you hear about Africa, and many times the image that comes is which war is coming next. I'll tell you another story of when I was a graduate student and I had to go to Rwanda. Again, I was asked by the Norwegians to go to Rwanda to start programs in Rwanda. And I got there, the war had happened, but there were women leaders who were keeping the community. Most of the men were in prison, some were dead. And one good story that comes from that is here we were seated, I had 300 people I was supposed to work with. And we sat in the center to discuss what program should start first. Is it health, education, social work, counseling? We didn't know what. Everything needed our hand in it, or our hand was already operating in all these spheres. So we sat in this place and we decided for women to go in different groups to create what they thought, what they imagined the new Rwanda to be. When the women went away, some of them came and they told us, they said, you know, we want to get a bus. And I thought, oh my gosh, a bus? But I held back. I said, let them explain the story of how they are going to use this bus. And this is what they said. They said, we want a bus, but we want seats to face each other. And we also They had the design of their bus, seats facing each other. They had a woman driver. They imagined the woman bus conductor, and they were going to run this bus from the Hutu, where the Hutu people lived, and then to the Batwa, whom you don't hear much about, and then to the Tutsi. But the bus conductor had a role, that when anyone got on this bus, she would really arrange the seats. So if a Hutu is sitting here, a Batwa sits next. The seats are facing each other, therefore you have to communicate. Now, and before they got to the market, they knew all about the other person. So in that imagination, we gave these women the bus. And the bus is still there, going strong, but it linked the Hutu, the Tutsi, and the Batwa. A very simple thing, which I would have said, oh my goodness, we don't want a bus in this situation. But we listened to them, and we got the bus. Women need spaces like that to be listened to, spaces at the policy-making table, so that their decisions, where war is made and peace is being made, if women are there, for sure, women can also contribute in stopping the war. Thank you.
I'm a little reluctant to say anything, and partly because I don't have any life experiences that compare with what you're hearing from. So I feel like I ought to keep my role relatively modest so they have more time to share what they've experienced and what they've learned. I will say a few sort of overarching things. I mean, first thing, one of the, I think, great signs of human progress, the existence of which is occasionally debated, is the fact that women are playing much more active roles in societies around the world. I think that's an undeniable good, not only just as a moral principle, but also for its practical effects. I guess the second thing I'd say, as someone whose view of international politics tends to the gloomier end of the spectrum, I regard any possible solution to problems of violent conflict as worth exploring and devoting a lot of time and thought to. The problem is big enough that we shouldn't be overly skeptical of anything until we've looked at it carefully. Having said that, let me make sort of 4 points about what I've heard and a little bit about what I've read here. The first point, the title of this forum session, Can Women Create Peace, at one level is a profound question, at another level it's an obvious question. Yes, the answer is obviously yes. The other half of that's more problematic, of course, and it was alluded to, I think, by our last speaker, was do women also contribute to war? And in what ways? And how do we feel about that? In the New York Times today, there was a legislator from South America profiled who's been defending paramilitary organizations. How do we feel about her role in the political process? The arguably most influential woman in the history of American foreign policy is currently the National Security Advisor of the United States, and one could argue that she has played a non-trivial role in the course of American foreign policy, including decisions to launch a war in Iraq. What's our view of that? Finally, what's our view of women who participate as soldiers in combat, which occurs in many societies, including American society now? And at one level, that might make us uncomfortable, but at another level, it's a sign of the virtue posed at the very beginning, that of equality. Second, I'm fascinated by the different ways of thinking through the role of women in causing peace. And I would just highlight that this can take several different parts or several different roles. One is the role in actually ending an ongoing conflict, whether as a member of a negotiating team or as a member of civil society pressing for that. Second is contributing to what one might call peace enforcement or stabilizing operations, even peacekeeping operations, while a conflict has been formally ended, but there's still a great potential for it. And then finally, what several speakers have already referred to, the role of what you might call peace building after a conflict, the attempt to reconcile societies, reconcile peoples, so that the prospect of a renewal gradually disappears and fades away. And the question I guess I'd pose for the audience, but also for my fellow panelists, is the role that women now play a commitment to a certain type of process, a way of approaching the problem? Is it a commitment to a specific set of policies, or is it a commitment to a particular kind of outcome? Those are three. Now, those aren't mutually exclusive. You could even say it's all three, but I'd be curious to what your perspectives are on that. Finally, just a paradox, I guess I feel compelled to observe. In a couple of things that Swani has written, she's suggested that some of the unique capacity that women have to contribute in this area is paradoxically a function of their second-class citizenship in many societies. That given the social roles that women have been forced to take, they acquire certain skills, abilities to negotiate, ability to compromise, empathy for others, etc., that turn out to be extraordinarily valuable when peacemaking is the problem at hand. The paradox, of course, is if the role of women in society were to change dramatically, do women run the risk of over time losing some of those special capacities that have made the contributions they're making today so visible? I'll leave that as a sort of nagging little paradox and stop there.
And let me open up our discussion now for other questions that you all have or comments. 4 mics. Please identify yourselves and keep it brief. I'll answer Steve's question later. Go ahead.
My name is Mary, and I'm actually an intern for the Women Policy Program. But this question is kind of for Sharani. In your opening remarks, you mentioned that there's a universal human rights charter. And I'd be very interested in what you thought about certain countries that are sort of coming to the forefront and saying, we don't need universal, it's got to be tailored to our own personal culture, our own country, and whether or not you think that that's the right way to go, that should the charter be more tailored, or must we keep it a universal human rights charter in order for it to be effective?
One of the important things about the universality of law is that we have to find our commonalities. We have to bond the commonalities and try to seek connections through our diversities. Now, many people I know, those who don't really know how the Human Rights Charter was formed, tend to talk of it as Western standards. But if you really look at the group who sat down to formulate the Human Rights Charter, who drafted it, there were people from Asia who were represented. There was a Pakistani on it. There was other people from Asia. So these are not Western standards. And in any event, what is this difference between the Western and the East? You know, we use Western cell phones, we use Western trousers, we use Western, everything is Western. I mean, to categorize everything from the West is good and everything from the East is bad or vice versa, I think this is the kind of polarization we have to avoid. There's a lot of good in everything. There's also bad. So let's overcome the bad and unite in the good. And I think having this overarching laws is a strength because we use it, and I do gender training around the Asia Pacific region. So we use it to overcome the problems in national laws, the narrowness of national laws. We use it to interpret those laws in the broader sense by using precedents throughout the world, by using the wider language of the Charter. So these are ways that we can use it as a very good tool. So to narrow it down and break it down and make it fragmentize it is like fragmentizing globalization. So I think we have to stop thinking in those patterns. And we really have to reach out. We have to educate ourselves on the other. And that's part of the reason. We are so ignorant about people, about their races, about what is intrinsic, what is wonderful about their different cultures. We really need to educate ourselves. We need the skills and tools of globalized laws, conventions to utilize. We also need to incorporate a new value system, change attitudes, to remove biases and prejudices. So I think these are all an ever revolving dynamic system which we have to incorporate. Does that answer your question? All right,
thank you. Sylvia.
My name is Sylvia Klude, and I'm in the mid-career program here. I'm also an attorney, and I know how important it is to frame an issue. I want to ask about framing this issue as women bringing specialness, or because we're different, we should be at the table because we're different, or would it be better if we framed the issue, we should be at the table because we're equal? We are equally good at analyzing things. We are equally good at understanding the problems. We are equally good at offering solutions. Now, it is true that we bring different perspective, but I want to ask your opinion about that framing, whether we should frame ourselves as different or whether we should frame ourselves as just as good, and therefore they have no right to deny us a place at the table.
Both. One of the things is, I don't think even women at the grassroots have even the time to say how do we frame this issue before we move it. They're just doing it. So I'll speak from that front. To me, we come not as one. I don't see ourselves like, we come as women who have never been allowed to be at these spaces. If we have gone there, we have gone there. Few of us who have been at the policy-making table have snuck our chance just to reach there. So most of us haven't gone there because somebody said, oh, there's a good woman here. Even if there are, you can name education, even if people are making decisions and you say, oh, I think so-and-so should be here, some people might say, we don't have women educated for that yet. And then you mention one and they say, I don't think she's here. So education may not even get us there. So to me, it is in those pockets where we see ourselves as part. We are part of the problem and we can be part of the solution too. So part of the problem is we are in the societies where war is made. Our children make war. We ourselves are part of the making of the war. We are affected in a different way. As I said, when you go to refugee camps, most of the men either have been killed or are in prison. Women remain as heads of households. There are more in the refugee camps. But when you come to people who stay with children more, until it changes, are women. So we have that power right from the grassroots of rearing our children to put a new ethic in action. But also we have the power of being these people who have been excluded from the table where policies are made to make our ideas be made. I'll give you an example of when I was barely 16, I was one of the youth sent to work with the white South Africans against apartheid. And I went because they could not allow Kenyans above 18 to have passports to go to South Africa. There were sanctions. So I was trained in the Delta movement, Development, Education, Leadership, Training, and Action. And 3 of us were put on a plane, stupid and young, and we went to talk to white South Africans who were against apartheid. They knew that their husbands could not listen to them. Their husbands believed in apartheid, but they wanted a new way. They knew it wasn't nice, it wasn't good, it was unjust. So what was our role? Out of this meeting came women who decided they were going to make different sanctions to their own husbands because they knew the roles their husbands played in society, and they knew where to pinch in order to get this working. And I know, as I speak now, that these women were just as part of the peace that came with apartheid as anyone else. They were participating. They knew nobody would tell them to come and sit at the table, but they knew they were in their homes with the people who were making decisions about apartheid. Ugandan women, another example. The Ugandans took women in to be members of parliament, but when they were going to make important decisions, they always sent the women to go and bring tea, serve them food. So the women took that as a way of finding their way to giving something to the table. So a woman would walk and say, they would say, we have just passed this, but as you are saying, Mr. So-and-so, as you have this water, I think it is different. This is how I think about it, and women were talking about it in the kitchen about this. Gives the tea, gives in her word, and goes back. Then another person comes and says, oh, but as you were speaking, what were you just saying when I was serving that? Something just got... So they got themselves to listen to this. So to me, I think wherever we get any pocket that allows us to the table as equals, we take it. That allows us to come as different, we take it. So we take every opportunity. We are always multitasking, and this is just one way we can multitask.
Sure, Masuda.
I have something I wanted to add to what Atema said, and I think that there's an example from Afghanistan as to why women feel they need to come to the negotiating table, and that is when the process was going on, there was, as you probably know, the different ethnicities were vying for different position, and what they said is, we want equal representation for our numbers. There's 40% of us Pashtuns, there's this percent Hazaras, etc. And they went to the UN, and the women said, wait a minute, if the UN acknowledges that different ethnicities need representation according to their numbers, why don't women get equal representation according to their numbers? And it didn't make any sense to them, and I think that the power of our numbers is not to be underestimated either. What we bring, I think, is equal and beyond, but we have a right to be there just because we represent half, in many cases over half of the population. And one of the things that I think Ala Talabani, who's from Iraq, a Women Waging Peace member, I think you said this last year, you said that women said, I don't only vote for myself, I also have a vote for my children. And I think that because women have historically prioritized health and education, as they did with the Afghan Women's Bill of Rights. If you look at the Bill of Rights that they drafted, education, mandatory education, is #1 for boys and girls. Health is right up there. When they went to the president of Afghanistan, they said, what are you going to do to disarm the population, and what are you going to do to end corruption? These are all things that nobody can argue against, and I think that there's this recognition that women's priorities are priorities of children, are priorities of rule of law, all of those things. And that's why I think women should be at the negotiating table.
I think that's part of the answer, Steve, to your question about if women aren't second class anymore, would they become like the guys in power? And that is that there is pretty clear research to show that women, when they are in policy-making positions, in a critical mass in particular, that they unite around funding for education and healthcare and social welfare, as opposed to militarism. Anissa.
Hello, my name is Anissa Newman. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School as well as at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I'd like to direct my question to all of our distinguished panelists, and it is regarding what the doctor mentioned about a new ethic in action. Speaking about development, education, and training being addressed at the grassroots level as well as the international field. What do you feel education's role is through training and enabling and developing the powers latent in humankind, especially womankind, to develop them as leaders, to fill important decision-making roles, and what change that can cause on a worldwide level?
When we talk about education, I like to qualify it as quality education. To me, when we think of even mandatory education for everybody. What type of education are we giving our children? What popular education are we teaching? We have, sometimes, maybe we have to re-educate or uneducate sometimes in order for change to happen. So people know when you talk about cultural norms, we have to educate about some of them. Some are good, some are not. So we have to make people to think, help people to think differently. And when we are giving education to our youth, what type of education are we going to give? Are we going to make them recite religious texts that without any hermeneutics of suspicion, so that they just go on and reproduce that? What type of education are we giving? So to me, the question back to you is, when we are doing that, what type of education are we advocating? We must advocate an education that has to bring change. Popular education that helps people to ask questions more than just receive answers. Make children see things very differently. I'll give you an example of Kenya. I worked with the nomadic ethnic group of Kenya as an education officer. And in that, there were very few girls went to school then, and this was in the mid-80s, and I wanted to get a lot of girls to school. But also, there were proverbs that were said around women, like if you do this, you're doing it like a woman. Or just any negative proverb depicted a woman. And I decided, one, either I would have gone to sit at the chief's meeting, which is called a chief's baraza, and tell them this is rubbish, or use the tools that were in the school. And the tools that were in the school was the National Music Festival. And I decided that every school sing a song in praise of a woman, be it their mother, be it a village woman, be it their sister, whatever it was. And they would get a trophy. That school would get textbooks and a library or whatever it was. I got some women from Geneva to sponsor books to go to these libraries. So it wasn't only girls singing about girls, but every member of the school. And they were going to compete up to national level. When the song reaches the national level, what happens is it becomes a national song, so everybody sings it. So it is on the airwaves, it is on TV, it is on the radio. Everybody hums to the tune. So in so doing, everybody is singing about how women are good. But at the same time, these kids are believing differently than the proverbs tell them. So there are those little ways that we can change. You can either confront it directly and say, I need every girl in school. Trust me, they won't come. They are home helping. Another thing is, how do we deal with those chores that the kids were doing in the home, and how do we convince parents that this quality education we are giving is going to be good for them and going to be good for the society? So there are many